There's a reason, I think, why we're no longer scared of hell as a culture. There was a time when Jonathan Edwards could preach a sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, and he could preach it in a monotone, moving only to turn the pages of his notes, calmly explaining how God's judgment was about to fall upon the heads of his listeners. And the congregation would fall out of its seats, fall out of the pews, fainting and weeping and crying out. Hard to imagine that happening nowadays. Now, I think part of it has to do, there's probably a lot behind that. Part of it's because we're more skeptical, this and that, and we're more jaded, which is, I think, largely what it is. But at the time Edwards was preaching, people were a lot more literary, in the sense that, thanks to Gutenberg, and you need to read McLuhan, especially his book Gutenberg Galaxy, the way they thought was shaped by writing. It was shaped by an abstract set. If you think of how the alphabet works, it's just an abstract set of characters that all represent very specific meanings. The sound represents, every syllable represents a certain, when it's organized a certain way. Every syllable on its own is meaningless. M is a meaningless sound. A is a meaningless sound. N is a meaningless sound. But together they form man, which is our arbitrary symbol for man. It's not like in the East, where the word for man is a little drawing of a man. And because of the very fact that that's the way they communicate is in these symbols, the way they think overall is more intuitive. It's more imaginative. Whereas in the West, thanks to Gutenberg, everyone could read, people thought in a more rational, linear sort of a way. And that's why you see these sermons by Edwards or by Finney or by Spurgeon or by Wesley, and they're basically treatises. And people would sit and listen to these 3-hour-long sermons that are just discussing theology. You can also see that in the Lincoln-Douglas debates over the philosophical legitimacy of slavery. I remember hearing that one of the answers that I think Lincoln gave to Douglas, the transcript is 13 pages long. You would never have that nowadays. Now we're a soundbite culture, as is said. And that has to do, I think, again, going back to something like McLuhan, something that he would say, something he would argue, we're more and more visual culture thanks to television and so on and so forth, now with the internet, which lends itself both to text-based and image-based communication. And Gutenberg and the Reformation marked the change from the Middle Ages, where, since most people could not read, they were mostly informed by images, by stained glass windows, by icons, and by morality plays and mystery plays. With that, I want to refer to kind of some of the images of hell that were depicted. I'm going to post a few links, but to just collections of images of hell and depictions of hell. And of course, the king of it was Hieronymus Bosch, probably. I'm also going to post, in the wake of Draw Mohammed Day, a link to a collection of depictions of Mohammed in hell. Not because I'm interested in stirring up sedition, but because I think it's interesting to show how Dante's Inferno and just this one section of Dante's Inferno has informed artists all the way from William Blake to Salvador Dali, because of the symbolism that Dante so skillfully employs to convey sin and the punishment for sin, both internally to the soul and what's going to happen ultimately at the final judgment. There's a reason why T.S. Eliot said that Dante's poetry is the greatest poetry that could ever be written. Not simply that has been written, but that ever could be written. And the way that translates into visual art. Because that's the way, poetry is similar to it in that way. It's not linear and rational. It is very intuitive. It is very much, I see a picture. I mean, here's an example from a book called The Hidden Power of Electronic Culture, written by Shane Hipps. Compare this. The boy is sad. Let's make sure you all can see that. The boy is sad. What that conveys to you as opposed to this image right here. Different thing altogether. A picture does speak 1,000 words. And on the other hand, a word connotes 1,000 pictures. For example, how would you pictorially represent economics? Or anything like that? Or loyalty? I mean, you can show pictures that sort of represent what loyalty means to you, but as far as an objective, clear handle for that concept, you need to have words. I mean, you have to have an alphabet. Anyway, all of this to say, now that we as a culture are very largely shaped by images, we're almost back to a medieval model, thanks to electronic culture. And he talks in here about things like how corporate logos now no longer need the word McDonald's underneath the golden arches, or the word Playboy underneath the Playboy bunny. I mean, the image itself already connotes so much. What is hell again for us? There was a time in the Middle Ages when hell was the things that I'm going to post links to. Then in the post-Reformation era, you had these abstract discussions of the theology of hell and how that related to grace and the law. Now in this age, what is hell for us? How can you represent hell in a way that will grab people's imaginations and so to speak, alert them to its possibility and the implications for people's lives and how they should live them? I'm going to post a link to a review of Hellraiser 2 by Siskel and Ebert back in the 80s, I think 1988, where they talk about how back once upon a time the images of people being skinned alive were the stuff of Hieronymus Bosch paintings. But now it's just, people just see it and laugh at it. It's now the realm of special effects artists and so on and so forth. Because of, I think a lot of the preponderance of horror movies that are just useless, garbage. Images that ought to have startled us into, not just startled us as to, this is what's going to happen to you when you die if you don't convert to Christianity, but furthermore, what is my sin doing? I mean, the fact that lust being represented by Dante as, being blown about by winds and having no control of yourself, stuff like that. Those images no longer have power for us, because instead of being used to connote something very deep and metaphysical and meaningful and human, they're now just shock value. It's basically pornography. And now we do have torture porn, literal torture porn, pretty much. I don't know if this makes any sense, but it's just something I've been thinking about. And that said, Scott Derrickson directed one of the last Hellraiser movies. That same series that Siskel and Ebert are criticizing for not, for desensitizing us to images once used to depict hell. He made that film, one of the Hellraiser movies, and he also directed The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which I commend to anyone to see. And now he's directing the upcoming Paradise Lost movie. Now, he is a Christian himself with a degree in theology, and he's also a filmmaker. He also directed the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I think he seems to appreciate sort of the way those same images of hell and those same images that we associate with the satanic can be used to great effect to get people thinking about issues that matter, including issues of their own salvation. Which is why I think, it'll be interesting to see how he takes the Paradise Lost story, how he interprets Milton, who's another poet dealing with the same stuff in the wake of Dante. Don't really know what else to say about that, other than one last thing. The reason I got all this started kind of collecting in my mind is because of the death of Ronnie James Dio. Because the cover of Holy Diver is a priest being drowned by a demon in hell. A demon flashing the Il Cornuto salute, the Rock On salute. And a Catholic friend of mine pointed out that people get offended by that, Christians get offended by that, but they get offended by the fact that medieval artists also depicted priests being broiled alive in hell. There's a lot you could say about the religion of heavy metal and rock music, but I won't talk about it now. I just leave that out there for your consideration. I hope it made some sense. Take care.